here, and those of you who are joining us by Zoom. This is the second in our series of presentations in the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. I think we're in our 15th semester of doing this series, and we're really glad that you're part of it. It's a series that is co-sponsored with the university's Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and our Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. So thank you again for joining us today. Please remember that we have 10 more presentations coming up this semester. They're open to everyone all the time. We always have cookies and coffee, except for today because the snow meant we had to cancel the coffee. But there are cookies up here for those of you who are here in person, so please help yourself. I'd also like to give a quick plug. If you do not get word of the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar through our weekly email bulletin, very easy to sign up. Just go to the Office of Sustainability's homepage. You'll see at the top right, there's a button where you can subscribe to get the bulletin every week. So now, without further ado, I'd like to thank and welcome our two speakers today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Brad. We really appreciate you having us here today. We're excited to share some of our research with you all. We're going to start off with the land acknowledgement. This presentation was created and shared on the traditional territory of the ancestral Lenni Lenape people. Many of us are guests to these lands, including myself. So let's strive to ensure that the work that we create and disseminate during our time here and beyond contributes to social justice here and across the world. And thanks to Jarita Gray Eyes for helping me craft this land acknowledgement today. My name is Emily Southerton. I'm an assistant professor of learning sciences here at West Chester.
And I'm Kate Southerton-Castillo. I'm a student in the TESC program, which is the Transformative Education and Social Change program. And we're going to introduce our work. Obviously, we share last names. We are sisters, and we're doing work that was really kind of started intergenerationally. When we think about this work, our dad was an outdoor educator and continues to be an outdoor educator for 45 years at this point, and a lot of this work stems from his influence.
So a quick roadmap of where we're going. We're going to start off by talking about this intergenerational framework that Kate and I have come up with. When I was asked to do this sustainability talk after taking the Brandywine workshop here at West Chester last spring, I was really thinking a lot about, what my work can say about sustainability. I started getting into conversations with Kate, as I often do, about the ways in which our shared work looks at kind of sustainability and the ways in which our dad's work as a sixth grade science teacher, and in particular through the outdoor education program, has influenced our worldview on sustainability. So Kate and I got together here to come up with this framework, like how is that work really influencing our research and our teaching in sustainability? We created this framework to share with you all today, called Getting Out in the Woods with Students, Centering Learners as Creators of Sustainable Futures. So we'll start with that introduction. We'll move into our two different studies, the ways in which we're kind of looking at this in different fields. Kate with her work with ELL students, me as a teacher of learning sciences, and in my research with K-12 students in computer science and English language arts. We'll end with some connections, and we'll have some time for a Q&A.
So we're going to start with a quick video from the local newspaper in Mifflinburg, Pennsylvania, the Daily Item, from a video in 2015 that really highlights the outdoor education program that my dad helped run and has helped run for over 40 years. And this is really where the idea for getting out in the woods came from. So I also want you to pay attention to the sound as you're watching this, because it's pretty great what you'll hear. I think you're going to have to share your sound, Em.
constantly, there's these moments where I realize how wonderful outdoor ed is. And you see the students completely enthralled and immersed in something that we brought in, something that they have found, something that we're studying. And to see that enthusiasm and to see them so focused in on something and excited about it, it's just a great sound to see them excited about learning. And this facility, Wesley Forest, gives us an opportunity to do that. We're out in the woods, and I don't think it's any secret that kids don't get out in the woods as much as they used to.
What do we know about Cyclops? Listen, Kate, tell me, what do you know about Cyclops? Raise your hand and talk to me. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, your name is... Okay. What do we know about Cyclops?
They have one eye.
Cyclops has one eye. So when scientists saw this, they always name something based upon the characteristic it has.
Students at one elementary school had an unexpected day.
We're not hearing you, Em.
Test 1, 2. Can you hear me now? Okay, technology. Okay, so Kate and I are both alumni of this outdoor ed program. We kind of experienced this as kids, but we also were able to kind of come back and observe this program as adults and also teach a couple lessons in it as well. But it's outside of our current field. Kate, as I said, is an ELL teacher. I was an ELA teacher, and now I teach learning sciences here at Westchester. So we were thinking about what about the program and kind of what we learned from this program contributes to our views of sustainability. And we broke it down into kind of 3 different areas. One thing that we learned is that it's important, as you heard in the video, to get kids out in the woods, okay? It's important to have give students connective, immersive experiences. Now, you can interpret the woods kind of metaphorically. The woods might look different for your field as it does for mine, and I'll share that in a bit. It also includes allowing this organic inquiry and learning to happen, where kids are naturally asking questions in the field in these kind of connective, immersive experiences that lead them through an inquiry process, lead them to learn and even act upon those environments. Finally, our work feels this work kind of leads to vital elements of sustainable futures, including belonging and agency. So we'll talk a little bit more about each of these pieces.
So the first idea is the idea of being out in the woods, that there is power in immersion. In the video, our dad talks about, names how rarely kids are out in the woods these days. And I think the same is true for a lot of different spaces. Children are not always given the space and opportunity to be immersed and make their own connections and those powerful connections that stem from experience. And so kind of the first step in this is really creating spaces for kids to have real organic experiences in the field.
The second part of our framework is this organic inquiry, allowing kids in those immersive experiences. And I'm saying kids, but we might be talking about adults if you work with your research is with adults or your teaching is with adults. Allowing an organic inquiry to occur in these spaces. Exploration is going to naturally lead to curiosity and to organic questions that kids will learn as they strive to answer those questions. It's also important for them to be able to act within and upon these environments. Through this, they kind of, start this cycle of learning that can really be sustainable. Now, we're talking about this in a very organic sense here with regard to outdoor education, but in my work, you can also kind of formalize it through various critical approaches like YPAR, Youth Participatory Action Research, which you'll hear about.
And then lastly, we talk about action and agency. Immersive experiences in which folks are getting curious, acting on their environments, shows them that they belong in that environment and to that place. And within that space, they're invited to create change. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my research. I'm a student researcher. I'm also a classroom teacher. So a lot of the work that I'm exploring is relatively new to me. And it's also things that I'm exploring that are deeply rooted in my classroom experience. So I'll start by briefly introducing a bit from my classroom and how kind of my mindsets have been developed by the work that I'm doing right now. And I'll go to the next page. So I'm currently a teacher in the Philadelphia School District, and I work with a scripted curriculum that asks my students to think about a bird you've seen very recently and write a descriptive paragraph about it. And to me, this was such a funny request because it seems very straightforward. Think about a bird, write about it. But most adults, let alone 10-year-olds growing up in West Philly, aren't prepared to write an essay about a bird they've seen, right? What does a bird eat? Where does it live? What does it look like? And so, they're asked to do this thing, and I took a pause and I said, well, let's just go outside and see what we find. And the interesting thing is, all it took was going outside, and the birds were there waiting for us. And in the test program, we talk a lot about alienation and the idea that words are emptied from their concreteness. They become hollow, alienated, and alienating. That's from Frary. And right away on the left, when you see my students writing here, you'll notice descriptions of birds that are so clearly real, which I love. The bottom one talks about a starling, which is different colors, and it's as colorful as a rainbow and as dark like the moon, which I really love because it's kind of hard to imagine something that's both colorful as a rainbow and dark like the moon until you see a starling and you see that both of those things are true at the same time. There's another thing here that says they walk like a teenager, bobbing their head, listening to music, which I love. The student laughed out loud when she saw how a starling walks, because you imagine birds kind of hopping up and down, but a starling really does strut around with its head down. Um, on the other side of the page, you start to see that students stop being just observers of birds, and they start shifting into something as someone who perceives themselves in relation to the birds, right? So this first one says, an English sparrow looks like Batman. It has a mask and a beard. I think its catchphrase is, I roam the parks of this elementary school and my name is Sparrow Man. And I love that because this is not just a bird he's observing, it's a bird in his school, and that bird has some type of relation to his school. And even in his case, this bird is somewhat of a protector of his school, right? And you start to see that there's this connection happening between him and this bird. And then below, another student wrote, our school doesn't talk about birds. My school has a lot of birds near the school, and we should talk to people and make them interested. And these are thoughts and inquiries and problems that my students were identifying on their own by the nature of stepping out of the classroom and stepping into the schoolyard. And I think that's the power of getting out into the woods. If you put kids in a position to start to be in an environment, they will start to engage with it. Yeah, I'm ready for the next one. And that really ties back into kind of like one of the ideas at the core of Westchester's education certificate and sustainability, which is we learn what we live, right? That students in the world will engage with the world and act upon it. So before I get into kind of the research that's stemming from this idea, I'll go through my positionality. I'm really interested in place. I grew up in a rural remote community. This like little overhead is what the Google Maps of Mifflinburg, Pennsylvania looks like. And you see it's a lot of fields. And as much as I love my hometown, my mindset when I was a kid is that, yeah, my future is to leave this place. And I did. I've worked and lived in Philadelphia, Memphis, and Kyoto, Chile. And in moving a lot for work and for life, there's definitely a feeling of ungroundedness. And in traveling, it might make you think, I see this view, I feel placelessness, but what I've really felt is how much place matters. Like I never cared so much about rain until I moved to a place where it doesn't rain for 6 months, or it doesn't rain for 6 months. And that was like deeply, deeply difficult. And so I've learned through travel how much place and belonging to a place matters. And that's been really central to my work. I teach immigrants and children of immigrants as an ESL teacher, and I'm married to a recent immigrant. And like in my field, we often talk about belonging and education in very much an abstract. And one of the things that I'm kind of exploring and seeking to do is really build the concrete conditions of belonging. on the bottom of this picture, you see like a little green space, and that's my yard in Philadelphia. And as somebody who grew up, in that top picture, for me, belonging in Philadelphia has so much to do with a little patch of green in my yard. And so thinking about like what are conditions of belonging, and I think they are deeply rooted to physical place. And as a grad student, that's something I'm exploring. So I guess I'll just define how I'm looking at sustainability here. I'm looking at the Brundtland Commission report, Our Common Future from the United Nations, which has the definition of sustainability as meeting today's needs without compromising future generations to meet their own needs, and doing so by balancing equity, ecology, and economy. And one thing I think that's interesting about that definition is that there is space to decipher and interpret what today's needs are, and part of my research digs into that question as well. I'll go to the next page. Okay, so as somebody who grew up in rural Pennsylvania, my interest in sustainability stems in part from that. There's this master demographic trend happening in rural Pennsylvania, which is chronic depopulation. And you can see some of the data here. At least 38 elementary schools, my own elementary school among them, in Pennsylvania have closed over the past decade. Most administrators cite population decline. And this isn't solely an education issue. It's as are very few things. It's tied into larger social economic crises and realities facing rural Pennsylvania. So that's one kind of big need we're seeing in rural PA. The next one on the next slide is that there's another master demographic trend happening in Pennsylvania, which is that international immigration is driving growth. So even though we see migration trending negatively overall in rural PA, we actually see the opposite happening for international migration. Over the past 10 years, and there's been a 7% increase in families of color in rural PA. And this is once again part of a much larger story. Between 1990 and 2016, rural areas saw a 12% decline in native-born populations and a 130% increase in immigrant population over the same period. So what this kind of tells me, and what this tells researchers, is that immigrants are central to sustainable futures. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Center for American Progress did a report in 2018 that really showed that rural immigration is crucial for sustaining communities, economies, and school districts. And even though this was a national report, they did highlight Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, showcasing how in Kennett Square, the large immigrant population, primarily working in the mushroom industry, is an indispensable workforce, tax base, and allowing schools to grow their enrollment. At the same time, this like amazing lifeline that's being brought to central Pennsylvania isn't being reciprocated. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that immigrants in rural communities are disproportionately impacted by rural disadvantage. Rates of poverty among rural racial minorities are 2 to 3 higher than that for rural whites. And obviously, we know that we're entering into a space of unprecedented risk and uncertainty for rural communities. And this is deeply, deeply tied to education. An example here is in 2018, there was an ICE raid in the rural community of Bean Station, Tennessee, where 100 workers were arrested. And the next day, 500 students were absent from school. So we see very closely how immigration is tied to education equity. And so kind of on the next slide, I'll talk about, when we look at that kind of first demographic trend, there's a lot of emerging research in the idea of place-based education and the promise of place, which is the idea that, when we have educational experiences that are rooted in community, people feel connection to that community. People feel a sense of belonging, a sense of knowing that is deeply tied to place. And this is a huge opportunity for investing in rural communities and seeing the value in rural communities and addressing this kind of demographic trend. And we'll go to the next slide. At the same time, we see when we're talking about place-based education, there is a dearth of work in making sure that that's critically responsive. There's a lot of research that suggests that place-based education can oftentimes kind of endorse these tacit colonial narratives and a capitalist orientation to land. So there's kind of a response to that, which is critical pedagogy of place, which really seeks to center Indigenous and marginalized voices within the curriculum and within the community. And we see that in terms of research, even though there's so much research being done about place-based education, Yemeni et al. In their systemic review found that only 7 are really exploring, 7 of those examples explored identity development and if people feel at home and belonging in place. And for somebody teaching immigrants and people who have moved from one place to another, that sense of belonging and home, I think, is something that really needs to be looked at much more carefully. So that brings me to kind of my hypothesis and my research questions. Right now, kind of my first hypothesis here is that when we talk about sustainability, belonging is central to that. Inequity today has implications for 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And so, yeah, this idea of inequity is tied to those other 3 E's, ecology, economy, and equity down the line. So one of my hypotheses is that belonging is a human need and it is a community need. My research question here is, to what extent can place-based YPAR, specifically critical place-based YPAR, support student researchers to develop a sense of community-based belonging? And then after that, to what extent does a sense of belonging of immigrant and multi-generational resident youth contribute to sustainable communities' futures, specifically for those rural communities I'm talking about? So my own theoretical framework here is in conversation with and hopes to bring together ideas from a lot of different pedagogies and epistemologies. The thing about place-based education is that it's very rooted in place. And so there's no, formula. Every single idea needs to be grown from the community it comes from and stems from. But I'm hoping to look and learn at pedagogies for Black urban struggle, indigenous pedagogies of place, feminist placemaking epistemologies, and global pedagogies of place to really inform and guide my own research. So one of the clearest traditions of critical place-based pedagogy comes from Black urban pedagogies of place that really build from the freedom schools movement and establish resistance against external enemies and internal contradictions, and moving beyond just resistance to really the creation of something new and organic and an establishment of what community looks like beyond exploitation of place. I'm also looking a lot at indigenous pedagogies of place. Go to the next one, Em. That I found that I found particularly inspiring is the idea that J.T. Johnson is an Indigenous scholar who's doing a lot of work in how we can bring center indigeneity in place-based learning. And one of the things he says is that the idea of placemaking doesn't require special skills. It doesn't require somebody special to do the work. It really just is a common response to common curiosities. What happened here? Who was involved? What was it like? Why should it matter? And anyone can be a placemaker and really understand place as a real thing endowed with meaning. And I think you see that in my students' work when they go outside. As soon as they get out into a place, those questions started to form organically. And that's, I think, a big part of also what our own kind of framework is centered in. And then also Lewin Trudeau talks about the idea that, indigenizing critical pedagogy is, something that's talked about in the abstract a lot. And she tries to offer really concrete examples, one of which is just storytelling and narrative and telling stories about a place, and generating connection to place. And you see that once again in my students' writing, where folks outside start telling stories about what they see, and how powerful and generative that process can be. And then on the next slide, I'll talk through, I'm also looking a lot beyond kind of Western or US based researchers here, because there is an absence of place in our research broadly. Because we so frequently in the Western world, in the white world, are looking at place from a very colonial point of view. And so if we want to get back to understanding place more fully, we need to look beyond our own borders. So I've been really drawn to Latinx, like senti pensante thinking, ways of thinking and being, which is basically an approach to knowledge that embraces the knowledge we hold in our heads and our hearts equally. There's a researcher, Emily Rendon, that says our greatest and most unique gift is ourselves, and the world needs our wisdom, our compassion, our generosity as much as it needs our brilliance. And then there's also, I got cut off here, I'm sorry. There's also a lot of orientation to place being done in Chinese literature, where you know there's a place-based researcher who's actually doing exactly the work kind of that I want to be doing, which is thinking about belonging, thinking about place for migrant communities and the knowledge that migrant communities hold for place. And so I'm interested in deeply kind of exploring that research further and knowing what I can learn from that space as well. So kind of this is the theoretical framework that I'm working for. And when I think about how I would apply this, these theories, these critical theories demand critical methods. And so the critical method that I'm going to be using in my own research is youth participatory action research, which is basically a research method where young people ask questions, conduct research to improve their lives, their communities, and the institutions that are designed to serve them. It allows kids to get out into the fields, into the woods, ask questions, and find the ways to answer them. And yeah, I'm hoping in this work that we can find some answers together and envision sustainable futures for the communities that I grew up in and that my students are growing up in, that really allow us to, live sustainably now and moving forward. And I do think that's possible. Yeah.
So I'll talk about my research next. Kate gave us a really great kind of a lot of theoretical framing to kind of help us support us in thinking through the ways in which sustainability is kind of connected to equity. It's connected to this framework that we have around immersive experiences, organic inquiry, and belonging and agency as kind of necessary elements of sustainable futures. I'm going to talk about an empirical study that I have done in this kind of area. And hopefully, if you're asking yourself right now, okay, can all these kind of critical theories and critical methods come together to actually produce the sustainable outcomes that we hope they can produce? I hope to give you some hope through some of the work that I'm going to present here and some of the results I've found. So my study is called Reimagining Youth Agency and Social Media Platforms with middle school girls and non-binary youth. So we're getting out of the woods a second, and we're going to get into the algorithms. So if your field is very different from fields typically associated with sustainability, like science fields, then you're kind of in my boat, and you'll hopefully see the ways in which I apply this framework to a field that's very different. So for my positionality, as you've heard, I'm the daughter and sister of teachers. I myself was also a middle school English language arts and computer science teacher before coming to Westchester here, where I teach the learning sciences class. To all kind of the future teachers have to take their ed psych courses with me. I'm also the designer of educational technologies. Before coming to Westchester, I created this program called the Poet Warriors Project, which if you take a class with me, you'll hear me talk about a lot. But this is kind of where I come from. And I come to my work in kind of three areas of critical inquiry. The first is actually technology and learning environments. So this is my woods that I hope to kind of get kids into and help them kind of explore and ask these kind of organic questions about. I also study youth agency development. That's my area of expertise. And I always connect it to critical literacies and social justice. So in my current study, I was responding to kind of an environment and a context that we're all living in, but in particular affects young girls and non-binary youth. And that context is one in which social media is kind of an everyday part of our lives. Some research was coming out in 2022 that was very concerning about this context that we're living in, and especially, as I said, for young kids. And research from Pew found that nearly half of US teens are being bullied or harassed online. Their physical appearances are seen as the common reason why. And for this reason, older teen girls are especially likely to report being targeted by online abuse. Now, this is not just a Pew Research study. There's been a lot of research coming out as of late to kind of really solidify our understanding of this context. There have been whistleblowers coming out of these companies as in the case of Frances Haugen coming from Facebook, to say that, this is not just an accident. These are actually designed interactions, that social media companies are designing them, are designing the platforms to target young kids and to target vulnerabilities in young kids, and in particularly young girls, to sell products like makeup. Some people are calling social media this dangerous experiment that's happening on teen girls. And while some of us are surprised and shocked by these results, teen girls themselves are saying they are not surprised, okay? That the findings around what we as researchers are uncovering is very unsurprising to them, because they've felt it for a long time and they've experienced it for a long time. Now, this is a context where this is not just, happening, to a few people. We know that teen social media use is now nearly universal. And in fact, 95% of youth ages 13 through 17 report using a social media platform. This is a huge issue. When we talk about kind of long-term sustainability of our worlds, and Kate kind of pointed out, equity has a huge impact on whether or not we're able to kind of create sustainable worlds for ourselves. It is necessarily tied with economy, as we see here from businesses trying to make money off these unsustainable kind of efforts. And then they also have these ecological impacts on, if we want kids to be those folks who are growing up to be empowered and powerful and create better worlds for themselves and others, then we need to be supporting their well-being as youth. So amid this context, there's multiple varying visions of who should actually address this challenge. In 2023, the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, put out this statement that's really called policymakers and technology companies themselves to take on these issues and create positive change for young kids who are on social media platforms. There's a completely different vision, however, and one that one of my students came to me with. And her vision is that students and young people ought to be the ones who are shaping today's and tomorrow's technologies. That policymakers and technology companies have had their turn and they've done a poor job, and that we should be turning to those folks who are most impacted by the harms of these technologies to change them. So my work really asks, what does happen when we kind of live out that second vision, when we center learners as creators of sustainable futures? So in this case, what happens when we really center these students and young people as designers of the technologies of the future? So I've got two research questions. To what extent and in what ways do a sample of girls and non-binary youth develop a sense of agency through a YPAR-like process that I call YPDR, in which they, being those harmed by social media platforms, actually take on the process of redesigning them for users like themselves? And then just what will those platforms look like? What features will emerge in the platforms designed, built, and implemented by youth? So I'm studying youth agency development, and the definition I use comes from Laura Ahern in 2002 and Giddens 1984. That's that agency is the will and capacity to act on the world. So I care a lot about supporting youth agency development. We've got a world that's full of problems, not just around social media use, but around, more classic kind of sustainability concepts like climate change. And I believe that if we want to be solving these extremely, tricky problems, then we should be fostering agency development in youth. We need to foster that will to act on the world and the capacity to act on the world in positive ways and create positive change. So Vaughn helps us see what agency can look like in three-pronged ways. Agency development can be dispositional, supporting ourselves and our students, having dispositions of agents of change, developing skills of intentionality and self-perceiving yourself as a change maker. I am a change maker. Agency development can look like have a motivational aspect where to develop agency, you have to actually be motivated to make the choices that a change maker would make and to have the persistence to persist through the challenges that you're going to come up against when you try to create change in tricky areas. Finally, Agency is also positional, okay? It's not just something that arises internally from the way we see our disposition or our motivation. We can also be positioned in certain ways by certain environments to have more agency and to develop more agency in the world. So we can be in an environment that allows us to have a voice and supports us in having a voice and developing that voice, or we can be positioned in environments that have the opposite effect. So in the case of reimagining social media platforms and supporting youth agency development through this work, I really wanted to design this immersive connective experience, kind of in the woods experience in the field of computer science. So while research suggests that youth are the primary user groups of these platforms, my study wanted to posit youth as the designers of these platforms as well, to be in the middle of that problem and that challenge and to be working on it. In particular, because girls and non-binary youth are most affected by these platforms, I wanted to center them in kind of this space. This connects with critical theory and design justice, which directly calls for those most affected by an issue to be central in reimagining its futures. That's the text you see here on the right. And for the record, it's an open access text that I highly recommend. I've got the link here on MIT Press. You can read it for free online. That's Sasha Costanza-Chock. It also kind of aligns with ideas from other kind of justice movements, like disability justice movement, which coined the phrase, nothing about us without us. So I wanted to center these kids in kind of this issue. And to do so, I went to a research setting. I went to an all-girls school to work with a subset of girls and also non-binary youth who attended that school to redesign social media platforms. This was at the height of COVID when this was happening, but kids were in school. So we were kind of in the middle of kind of a international crisis, working on another international crisis together, which just showed the kind of agency that these students had in completing this task. So what I did was I brought a framework similar to what Kate's working with, YPAR, and I call it youth participatory design research, wherein you take an interactive K-12 learning environment, you support kids in enacting youth participatory action research, taking on an issue, asking questions about it, designing kind of research experiments to kind of come to an understanding of how to address that issue. But the action that they take, the A, is design, is creating some sort of design, similar to what you might see in participatory design research. So hence YPDR. Part of that organic inquiry that happened during this kind of process was this getting in the algorithms with students through a design cycle. I wanted to bring a design cycle that professional designers use to design social media platforms, and I wanted to bring it to these girls and non-binary youth and allow them to go through the exact same process that professional designers go through when creating platforms. So that process starts with empathizing with the user, imagining possible solutions, and then, of course, creating them. So here's an example of what an empathize exercise looked like. Kids interviewed one another about what their experiences were like on social media and collected data. They use that data then to kind of analyze some common themes and imagine some possible solutions to them. In a classroom, this really looked like various sticky note activities where we were rearranging their ideas and putting them into conversation with each other. And then we actually allowed them to create new social media platforms. It started using very simple tools like Google Sites for kids to design a possible social media platform. Here you see a platform called Notebook, which had a daily debate page. Kids wanted the opportunity to debate one another on their school social media platform. And on the other social media platform that you see designed here, kids designed this page for a safe place for opinions, even on kind of highly contentious political topics. So these are examples of the platforms that they designed. So I collected data all along the way. I, conducted surveys, for example. I interviewed students. I had focus groups, one of which a kind of focus group worked with me for the next 3 years to take these ideas together and create one platform that represented all the students' ideas. And through my analysis, I found that youth participants do in fact experience a significant increase in their sense of agency during a participatory design process of educational technologies. When you immerse students in the problem, you allow them to have this kind of inquiry process, they will develop a sense of agency in the world through that process. What's more, they experience a significant increase in their sense of choice in the world and having choice over their social media platforms that they create and that they use, and a sense of intentionality. They were building this intentionality to create change in an area that previously had felt very overwhelming to them and had felt outside of their control. My final finding was that youth participants' agency was manifested in the platform designs. So what this means is that youth created agentic opportunities for themselves and others on their social media platforms. So this actually created this kind of cyclical effect where not only did they themselves feel an increase of agency, but their platform designs included spaces for others to develop agency. You saw that in the case of kind of the debate page, where kids could develop their own voice in the world, and also similarly in the sharing opinions on politics page. Here's just an example of what our final platform design looked like. This is a platform that got implemented in student schools, and they were able to use this to then communicate with one another and share work that they were conducting in class. Finally, the students went beyond what the study was even about and decided to design their own mini school for supporting others in designing social media platforms. This went far beyond what I expected would come from this study, but really showed kind of the extent to which students developed a sense of agency when we simply gave them kind of this challenge and allowed them to solve it on their own. So there's a couple implications. Centering learners as creators of the future does support youth agency development. Youth-created spaces are themselves agentic, empowering other youth and creating sustainability loops. And building better futures is not just a technical task for environmental or computer scientists, but one that will benefit from the types of critical reimagining of spaces focused on the experiences of those most impacted by their harms. So we hope that you got something out of kind of our presentations here today, either hearing a little bit about our dad's work, hearing about Kate's work, or my work, that you can kind of think through and kind of develop through this framework. This kind of in the woods connective experience that leads to organic inquiry, learning, and action, and ultimately leads to vital elements of sustainable futures like belonging and agency.
We also thought through a few questions that you can ask yourself in your own work and your own research. Like we said, Emily and I, neither of us work literally in the world of outdoor education. So a lot of this process was trying to take the lessons that we've learned from our dad and apply them to our own fields. And so these are some of the questions we asked ourselves, and you might ask yourself in that same process. So how can you center learners as creators of sustainable futures? What experiences can you create to support learners' connection to the issues in the field? How do you make space for inquiry and learning and action? And then how might you foster learners' senses of agency and belonging in the world?
So thank you so much for listening. We're happy to take some questions, and we've also got our emails here in case you'd prefer to kind of email them afterwards. Thanks again to Brad and the Sustainability Council for having us.
Hey, we have a few minutes left for 12:50. Questions can come from those of you on Zoom. Just raise your hand, Zoom style, or if there's a question here in the live audience, we can start with that. Looks like Cheryl, Professor Wanko has a question.
There, I'm trying to get my video on. Yep, there it is. I'm going to lower my hand. Well, first of all, congratulations on this intergenerational relationship that's so, healthful for the world and for other people. I really think that's something that you should be celebrating every day, and you probably already do. If it were an intergenerational relationship in my house, I'd probably been on an oil rig right now. Kate, I'm going to ask the dumbest question, and I apologize for this, but it's one that, we all struggle with. Like when you take folks outside, this is so pedestrian, how do you get them away from the electronics? Are they not allowed to have electronics outside? Because, you're describing those beautiful engagements with the birds, etc. And I'm just trying to get folks off of this.
Well, I have the luxury of working in a no phone school. So as a teacher, that was a really easy answer. But honestly, I think another answer there is I also stuck binoculars in their hands, which made a big difference. Thankfully, I'm really into birds because of my parents, and so I had some that I could bring into the classroom, and that's something that like we have a grant program that we can apply through our school, and I'm trying to apply through that program for like more of those, because once you have something else in your hands and something else that you can a new gadget basically, it's rather than like taking something away, it's placing something else in their hand that's something else to figure out. And I think that was really effective as well because everybody wanted to use them.
Thank you.
And I'll add, Cheryl, on the ProTech side of things, there are a lot of great apps out there these days that do allow kids to actually further their inquiry process and their curiosity in the world. I know that our dad has implemented a few of those apps in outdoor education to allow kids to do various classification of creek bugs, for example, and do real citizen science where they can submit what they're finding to larger data sets. So there are ways to also, possibly embrace it and further your goals.
I have a quick, oh, go ahead. Did I see your hand coming up? Please.
Yes, thank you. I work part-time with majority immigrant students, and I teach them ESL and also math skills. And something that I had never considered was a sense of place. And I work at one of those teaching centers, like Kumon Center, where it's just math and reading. But do you have any advice for how, I know it's an indoor spot and it's in a little strip mall kind of area, but how could I begin to kind of create a sense of place for the students? I don't think that's something I've ever considered because a lot of them are also immigrants. It's not just the parents had the children here, they immigrated themselves. So like, how could I make a space for them that emphasizes their place?
That's such a great question and something that I've been navigating a lot too. Like I have the luxury of a schoolyard at one of my schools, but not all of them have it, right? And so it is a question of like there is a crisis of placelessness, and I think that it does take a lot of intentionality. One thing that I did at another school is even just starting to move beyond my classroom. Like I know, like sitting in a classroom makes all of the learning feel so kind of like abstract, but even just taking learning like out of a book and into the hallways, into other classrooms, like connecting with other teachers and things like that. So that way they don't just see themselves as like learners in one space, but that this space is a part of a slightly bigger space. That is a part of a slightly bigger space. I also ask kids to like pay attention like to what they're seeing on the way home and then bring those stories back into the classroom. And I think that's where like narrative comes into play. Like the more we talk about our place, the more kids start thinking about our place. And so even if it's like, what do you notice in your own neighborhood? Is there like a tree somewhere on your block? Just something that grounds kids in the fact that our learning exists in the world and outside of the classroom.
Definitely going to begin to ask those questions. I want to develop a better rapport with the students, especially to create a sense of belonging for them. I'm certainly going to ask those questions. Thank you.
We are a little after 12:50, so we always pause at this point because some of you here in person or those of you on Zoom have to get to another class or another meeting. If you do need to leave right now, please feel free. But I'd like to ask Kate and Emily, do you have a few more minutes if there are questions from those who can stay?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So we've got a few people moving here. I just wanted to say that I really love the way that you use that phrase, getting out in the woods, both literally and metaphorically, in the ways you're both doing your research. It did, however, bring me back to that literal sense, because the Gordon Natural Area on Westchester University's campus is such an important part. I'm wondering, do either of you have experiences with our Gordon Natural Area? Has that spending time or taking students there contributed to the way you think about these issues?
I mean, I've had my own experiences there. I've gone hiking out at the Gordon Natural Area and I love it. It's such a great resource for Westchester. And I've been looking for opportunities to kind of take my students there. The most I've done with my undergraduates is take them outside into the campus. All my classes happen on main campus, and Gordon Natural Area is a bit of I think we would need to get a bus to go down there. So we've gotten out to the natural areas on the main side of campus, but yeah, I'm kind of looking for an opportunity to get down there. And one of my colleagues just did his bus certification. So maybe there'd be the opportunity to partner with him and get a bus of students down there.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned that. We, in our office, of course, try to promote faculty and students making use of that space, and staff too, encouraging people to get down and use that space. We do know that there's a bit of a barrier to get there when most classes are on North Campus and it's on South Campus. But hearing you say that, I think we'll go back and think about ways our office and other offices on campus can help break down that barrier a little bit to make that space more a part of everybody's learning opportunities at the university.
Yeah, let's talk. You know, I care about this, so I'd be very open to trying it out. And maybe it would be something where I could combine my 3 50-minute classes a week into an hour 50, right, on one day and get students out there. So I'm still new here, so I'm not sure if we're allowed to do that, but let's talk and figure it out.
We'd be happy to help figure that out. Yeah. Kate, do you have direct experience at Westchester University?
As a student, I do, but as a grad student, so I'm in my first year of my grad program with TESC. So no, I've not taken any classes there, but I bet I could I could try to convince some of my professors, specifically Dr. Morgan, to try and make that happen.
I think he would be supportive of that idea. Any other questions for those of you here in the room, or Walt or Sarah or 121-829 or Joe?
You might recognize Joe from the video at the beginning. We had to invite him here. He is a bit of a guest of honor. Thanks for being here.
In that connection, yes. Thank you for being here. All right, well, we're almost at 1 o'clock, and we want to thank you again. And we really appreciate your making time. Really fascinating research and lots of food for thought in the type of work we all do.